Kelsey Berganza. I am a third-year biochemistry major, and I will be presenting my research on exploring seasonal dynamics of sulfidic conditions in the drying Salton Sea, California. The Salton Sea is located in southern Riverside and northern Imperial counties in Southern California. It was created by a massive flooding of the Colorado River in 1905, and its water levels have been declining at a rate of 0.3 meters per year. This is due to less agricultural runoff and mitigation of water coming from the Colorado River due to the water transfer agreement between the Imperial Valley and San Diego. You might be thinking, well, why should we care that it's drying up when it wasn't supposed to be there in the first place? Well, as the water levels decline, there comes an increase in salinity and surface eutrophication, also known as an excessiveness of nutrients in the water. This results in anoxic and sulfide-rich bottom waters and massive fish die-offs. On top of that, as the water levels decrease, we see an increase in playa exposure, which is dry lake bed, and this exposed playa contains toxic dust particles, which are transported through the air, creating respiratory problems like asthma for the local residents. So this brings us to the research questions I will be addressing today. How does the biogeochemistry of the Salton Sea change over the seasons, and how does this impact sulfidic conditions? In order to answer those questions, we must know what is the biogeochemical process that occurs and leads to the hydrogen sulfide emissions. From what we know, the agricultural runoff has a lot of nutrients as well as pesticides and fertilizers, and an anaerobic metabolism occurs under the chemocline. This leads to euxinic deeper waters, also known as anoxic and sulfide-rich bottom waters. And during the summer, upwelling occurs, which results in the release of hydrogen sulfide emissions, or that rotting eggs that you all may be familiar with if you reside in the Inland Empire. These hydrogen sulfide emissions have caused massive fish die-offs in the Salton Sea, and they can also lead to serious health issues in humans, like low blood pressure and psychological disorders. In order to conduct this research, I used data from fall 2020, winter 2020, and summer 2021, all of which was collected from the Salton Sea water column by researchers in the Lyons lab. They utilized the YSI XO2 multi-parameter sonde, which is a probe that measures different water column parameters. And I used Microsoft Excel to plot the data, which was retrieved by the XO2. So results for seasonal stratification, temperature versus depth. I used Excel and plotted temperature versus depth and reversed that y-axis. This way we can visualize the depth of the Salton Sea by starting at the surface of 0 meters and ending at the deepest end of 14 meters. Based on the data we plotted, we can see that during the fall and winter, the surface of the Salton Sea remains at a lower temperature of around 16 degrees Celsius, while in the summer we can see that there is more thermal stratification. When analyzing dissolved oxygen versus depth, the biggest change that we can see is between winter and summer. In the winter and even the fall, we can see that there are oxic bottom waters, which can be related back to the temperature that I previously spoke about, because cold water holds more oxygen. And in contrast, we can see that an anoxic event occurs in the summer, since the surface water is oxic for about only 3 meters, and then dissolved oxygen remains at 0% as we go down deeper into the water. This now brings us to oxidation reduction potential, or ORP. So now looking at ORP versus depth, we are able to detect a negative ORP that is close to 0 in the fall. Then we can see a positive ORP in the winter, and finally a very negative ORP in the summer. So what does this mean? Well, we know that sulfate reduction occurs at around negative 200 millivolts, or lower, which in this case, we can see occurs in the summer. This is an indication that there are sulfate-reducing bacteria in the summer, which produce a acidic environment and hydrogen sulfide emissions. While on the other hand, ORP stays higher during the winter and fall, so we can assume that sulfate reduction most likely doesn't occur because the ORPs are not low enough. Although in the winter, a coordinate appears at around -60 millivolts, which may suggest an anaerobic pathway may be occurring, but we still are unsure what it may be, and we know that it isn't low enough to be a sulfate reducer. As a result of the data analysis, we can piece together that the biogeochemical processes in the Salton Sea water column differ throughout the seasons. This is because in the winter and fall, the ORP is higher and bottom waters are oxic, since, as stated before, cold water holds more oxygen. So we can assume that it is unlikely that sulfate reduction takes place because it is, after all, an anaerobic pathway. While in the summer, we can conclude that sulfate reduction is present in the sediments due to ORP values decreasing to below -200 millivolts as we reach the 14-meter depth. As the temperature rises, the water column becomes anoxic and ORP decreases, which leads to a good environment for sulfate reduction to occur. But unfortunately, this leads to an uninhabitable environment for the local wildlife. The process of sulfate reduction results in the release of hydrogen sulfide into the atmosphere. So it's safe to assume that in the summer, sulfidic conditions will most likely worsen and the rod and egg stench will be enhanced. Assessing the changes that have occurred in the Salton Sea can also potentially allow us to understand how the biogeochemical changes are affecting local communities. And this brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. And I just want to give a special thanks to my PI, Dr. Tim Lyons, and the graduate students, Caroline, Allison, and Charlie for their support and providing the data. And a thank you to Dr. Wessler and Dr. Nugent, as well as all the peer mentors and RISE coordinator, Nee. And thank you to those who funded my research. None of this would have been possible without any of these people, so thank you. I'll be taking any questions now.